The image that you are seeing on screen is a digital painting that I started drawing around the 20th of February, maybe slightly beforehand. I started this piece with the intention of having it finished within a couple days, possibly a week at the, well, within a week if we're being totally realistic. Unfortunately, this piece proved to be a lot more fussy. For whatever reason, I was having an extremely hard time visualizing the kind of look I wanted with it, and I was more so treating it as a way to sort of be a little bit more free-flowing and less rigid and clinical with my painting. It was supposed to be something that I just sort of did off the cuff with not much care and more so just to get an image on the table. And unfortunately, it actually stole away a lot of creative energy that wound up being more or less burned into the aether, just kind of lost. Which is kind of frustrating because there are aspects and ideas about it that I very much liked and very much want to explore later. Mostly the sort of base idea of what I wanted this painting to reflect. And I'm making this video to just kind of go in depth to explain to you what I wanted this picture to represent and what direction I wanted to go with it. Sort of making a bittersweet lemonade from, me abandoning my work. Anyway, so right off the bat, the base inspiration for this came from Destiny 2, specifically the Beyond Light DLC that they released not too long ago. I won't be going into too much detail as to what the DLC is about, but as a sort of in a nutshell explanation, the player character, very affectionately titled the Guardian within the context of the actual game, gains a new superpower, that being the ability to control and manifest ice for various means of attacking and killing enemies, basically. And over the course of the main campaign, you go about learning how to control this ice power, and eventually you work your way up to the alien race that actually more or less developed this power for their own personal uses, but the Guardian character just kind of stole with the help of another character called Elsie. Shortly before the final boss, actually exactly one room before facing the final boss of the Beyond Light campaign, the Guardian meets this sort of high-ranking, well, I guess relatively high-ranking Elixni person, which the Elixni being the name of the race that you're fighting against. And up to this point, in every other instance of the game, whenever your player character walks into a room, they are immediately attacked by enemies of the game. Like that standard stuff, right? You walk into a room, there's a hostile enemy, it will immediately attack you regardless of whether or not you attack it. Like, that's commonplace throughout the entire game. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it was a glitch within the game's code, but the Elixni that is supposedly guarding the final boss of the campaign won't attack you. It'll just kind of stand there, flanked on either side by a few other Elixni, like lower-ranking soldiers, just sort of like sitting there, just waiting. And as you walk in, they will not attack you. And in fact, I'm pretty sure they won't even bother attacking you unless you walk past them to the door. Like, they'll just stand there and stare at you. And of course, like most Guardian instincts are, you walk in, you shoot a couple bullets, and things are over. But I don't know. I play like more sloppily. I don't fire until until the enemy is proved to be aggressive in most PvE, player versus environment scenarios. Like PvE, that's not what PvE stands for. Anyway, so as soon as I walk in, I just kind of aim my gun at the Elixni, and to my surprise, they don't react hostily, and I'm just sort of standing there awkwardly, looking at them. And this was a very simple moment. If it was intentional, I haven't found the reason for it yet. But if it was like an error in the game's programming, that's really interesting to me. Uh, so, I mean, eventually I kill the guys and just walk through the door. But like that moment stuck out to me a lot because it's the first instance of uh, where there was an accidental hearts and mind situation where the enemy didn't really try to stop me until I walked past them, and I didn't really want to kill them because they weren't showing aggression to me. After I defeat the final boss, my mind just sort of drifts back to that one moment, that brief minute or so where I was just sitting there in a room alone with with Pixis, the name of that Pixis being the name of the Elixni that didn't bother attacking me on sight. And I just kind of started absently thinking and started writing a narrative as to why this particular Elixni didn't really show aggression. Because Destiny is structured its storytelling around the player character, quote-unquote, being the audience surrogate, it sort of lends itself to the idea that you are the most proactive force within the universe, thus being the quote-unquote main character in a sense. You're the most competent guardian, doing and accomplishing the most amount of stuff. And while that sort of like power fantasy is nice and all, it doesn't really give itself to any credence to what happened before your character became a guardian and started living through the events of Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. And I'm sure a lot of players have done this, I started writing an overarching narrative as to who my guardian character was, and probably the most natural thing to add to my character's backstory would have been that prior to the events of Destiny 2, prior to the events of Beyond Light, he had an interaction with this specific Elixni, Pixis is their name, and I wanting that reaction to be pleasant because there's really no other way that it would make sense for both my guardian and Pixis to just kind of stand and stop and just stare at each other without any aggressive action. It would make sense that they sort of had a kind of kinship. They were on friendly terms, like speaking terms. And so the idea here is that Pixis joined the Elixni group that was sort of founding the new ice power stasis, and was sort of just living in the main base of operations, just sort of like a ways away from the events of the rest of Destiny 2, where my Guardian was sort of doing their due diligence and proper tasks. And eventually, when they meet back up just before the end of the campaign, that is the first instance of them seeing each other in a very long time. And I just sort of played out a scene in my head where my Guardian walks through the door after burning a hole through the Elixni defenses, and as far as Pixis knows, there is just a hostile Guardian within their base, and he has to then stop them from reaching the final boss of the his boss and his Kell. And upon opening the door, my Guardian immediately recognizes Pixis because I don't know, narrative reasons, plot devices. Hey, I never said I was a good writer. And so upon recognizing the Elixni that he had some sort of friendly terms with, my Guardian immediately drops the mindless killer persona that I think is safe to say most Elixni have regarding light bearers and Machineborns, and just sort of immediately calls him out by name. And to the surprise of Pixis, he then immediately recognizes my Guardian. And for the sake of like explaining this, I've taken to calling my Guardian Kane. And so Kane and Pixis they have a pleasant conversation, and they reminisce about what they've been doing and whether or not their other friends, both on the Elixni side and the Guardian side, are still around to, you know, some like some like mixed sad results. Like some people on the Guardian side are dead, some people on the Elixni side are dead, and in some cases they killed each other. It's more so just a morbid, friendly encounter. And the whole crux of the moment is sort of stapled uh, between the this final interaction. Kain looks up to Pixis with the best smile that he can muster with his baked-in exo expression, his ocular lenses just sort of widening to try and soak in as much detail about his old friend as he can. And Pixis just sort of looks down at him and regards him with a kindness that very few other Elixni actually manage to have. And after a silent moment, Kain looks down at the door, then looks back up at Pixis, and he says, "You know I have to get through that door." And Pixis nods knowingly and simply says, "And you know I have to stop you." And Kain nods back in response, and he quietly says, "It was nice seeing you again." And he holds out his hand to shake, to which the Elixni takes hold of the Exo's arm and remarks, "Your hands are quite cold." And Kain solemnly says, "Yes, but my heart is always warm." Yeah, and that's it. And so the painting was supposed to reflect the sort of want and death and destruction of Kain as he makes his way to the base, and then the vague Elixni shape on the lower half of it is was meant to be Pixis, although like the background doesn't really lend itself to where you actually meet Pixis within the campaign. And so where that honestly, it's a really neat idea that I'll probably come back to later. But for now, I'm just going to leave it be. And I'm going to thank you all for watching. Bye bye.